To seek to understand human beings is to seek to understand their uniqueness. The radical division between human beings and the rest of nature is so striking that for pre-scientific thinkers, it was sufficient proof that we were the divinely favored portion of creation. After all, human beings speak, fantasize, laugh, fall in love, are capable of great acts of self-sacrifice or of cruelty. Human beings create great works of art, read and write poetry, and can choose who they really are and what they really want. But they also distinguish themselves by the sheer numbers of kinds of substances they use and become addicted to in the environment. We, as humans, indulge in activities that alter both the content and the experience of our own consciousness. Drugs are a means for achieving a number of particular, often recreational changes in conscious experience. Drugs are also a large contributor and facilitator of human suffering and health problems. The best health advice anyone can give to most people most of the time regarding recreational drug use is this: do not use drugs. Have you ever heard that before? Many people, however, do not find this advice particularly attractive or even sensible. Everything we do is for the purpose of altering consciousness. We form friendships and establish relationships so that we can feel certain emotions, like love, and avoid others, like loneliness. We eat specific foods to enjoy their fleeting presence on our tongues. Every waking moment and in our dreams, we struggle to direct the flow of sensation, emotion, and cognition towards states of consciousness that we value. In fact, the ways in which humans use plants, foods, and drugs cause the values of individuals and whole societies to shift. Eating some foods makes us happy, eating others sleepy, and still others alert. We are jovial, restless, aroused, or depressed, depending on what we have eaten. Society tacitly encourages certain behaviors that correspond to internal feeling, thereby encouraging the use of substances that produce acceptable behaviors.
Is it wrong for human beings to explore the inner landscapes of mind? How could that be wrong? That's part of the human drive to understand, to self-awareness. No, I think it's intrinsically a right thing to do. I would just say this, though. I would just say, not only is it appropriate for humans, individuals, to study, I think it's an important aspect for science. You know, I mean, I'm a neuroscientist. I want to understand the brain at a scientific level as well as at experiential level. And I think it's wrong that society really has stopped scientists doing that. And it stopped it so effectively that scientists, by and large, do not know what they're missing. They don't even realize the opportunities that the study of these drugs could bring.
I think it's a natural human instinct. The fact that it is a perfectly natural human desire. I mean, in every civilization, every culture, people find a way of usually using some sort of psychoactive substance of altering their consciousness. And even children, you know, children will hang upside down off a swing to deliberately make themselves dizzy. You know, that's why children like roundabouts. That's why people like going to fun fairs on helter-skelters and things. So I regard it as just a perfectly natural human instinct.
Well, I can only tell you, in my opinion, what I think consciousness is. I think consciousness is the driving force in every human being. It's what makes me, me, what makes you, you, but what makes me and you the same thing, if you get what I'm saying.
Provided it's an adult, that's an informed adult that's making those choices, then I think people can do what they want. I think if they harm other people, then that's where I have a beef about it. So if you're taking a mind-altering drug and then you jump into a car, then I don't think that's right. I don't have a problem with mind-altering drugs and people taking those drugs. But I do understand legislators feeling that if they're trying to bring about the common good, that complete freely available mind-altering substances is a good idea.
Looking at how drugs came to exist, it would be surprising if we didn't take them. Drugs are a product of a complex evolutionary game, because as fungi and plants evolved, some developed chemicals in their leaves or seeds that deterred the insects and other animals that fed on them, helping the plants to survive and reproduce. These chemicals mimicked the same natural substances in creatures by either overloading their nervous systems or poisoning them. Insects and the larger animals that followed them evolved in turn, adapting to these changes and sometimes developing a liking for chemicals. Many animals in the wild can be seen seeking out drugs, from goats eating coffee beans and jaguars consistently ingesting hallucinogenic plants, to pigs and elephants gorging from the alcohol and rotting fruit. This attitude towards certain substances results in a completely different behavioral pattern, which not only the animal recognizes, but also may have developed a taste for. All to change consciousness. Most of the drugs we use today are either made directly from plants or are synthetic derivatives of these plant chemicals. A drug's effect can be benign or harmful, or both, often depending on the dose. To understand how they work, we need to understand some of the basic mechanisms of the brain.
And my own view is that consciousness is obviously a fundamental question. The nature of consciousness is a fascinating question. It's one of the target questions for neuroscience and neuroscientists. And I think it should be an object of intense study. Sadly, I think a lot of the opportunities to study consciousness, particularly the way in which drugs change consciousness, has actually been ignored or overlooked, largely because of the drug laws really do get in the way of this kind of research.
America's public enemy #1 in the United States is drug abuse.
Certainly from my experience, where I've been 34 years now in law enforcement, and I've thrown the kitchen sink at drug dealing, and it's worse now than it was when I started.
I think as human beings, when we're told that we can't do something, it becomes more attractive to us, and that's about anything. So if you use psychology a little bit more thoughtfully, then you would have a broader approach than prohibition. Prohibition sets itself up for failure. It's been proven. I don't think there's anything more to say in the matter. It's been proven. Yeah.
And not only has it never been effective, but I mean, and this is a absolute. I mean, this could almost be a. They should probably put this on my gravestone. Prohibition always causes more harm than it prevents.
It is important to make a distinction between drug prohibition as described here, which puts an absolute prohibition on the production, supply, and use of certain substances, and regulated drug markets under which some activities are illegal and some remain prohibited. Prohibition is an absolutist position, whereas its repeal opens the door for a wide variety of possible regulation. The total expenditure on drug law enforcement by the U.S. has been estimated at over $1 trillion, bearing in mind that no effective results have ever been met as misuse increases and criminal organizations expand to this day. In the United Kingdom, the annual government expenditure on drug policy is around £1.1 billion. $300 million goes towards enforcement, while $3.35 billion is spent on drug-related offending across the criminal justice system. Prohibition may pointlessly ruin the lives of non-violent drug users by incarcerating them at enormous expense. This has been said to represent one of the great moral failures of our time. These and many more examples indicate it is likely that between a third and a half of drug-related expenditure globally is spent on enforcement. The overarching aim of the war on drugs is to eliminate or significantly reduce the availability and use of illegal drugs. Yet despite decades of increasingly growing enforcement budgets globally, each year we are further from the aspirational goal of a drug-free world. Instead, as we can see, drug markets have expanded violently and use has continued to rise.
Well, I think it's safe to say in the United Kingdom there is a lot of opposition to the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. Reasons being primarily because of the loss of life, the huge money spent in these countries to achieve something that hasn't materialized. Why then can that same logic not be channeled into another war that we've declared, well before Iraq, well before Saddam Hussein, which has cost us more lives and money than any intervention we've had in the Middle East, the war with the greatest amount of diminishing returns, and it is the war on drugs.
Under the UN drug treaties of 1961, 1971, and 1998, over 150 states signed into the domestic law, including the UK. The state's aim of prohibition is to reduce the production, supply, and use of the specified drugs and ultimately to create a drug-free society.
So, of course, one of the most ridiculous statements in the history of mankind was the UN saying 10 years ago, we're going to have a drug-free world. I mean, that tells you two things. That it was so moronic a statement. It shows that they had no understanding whatsoever of the problem. In fact, they didn't bother even to ask any experts. This was just some idiotic statement. It was a soundbite. There was nothing underpinning it at all. And they've just been proved absolutely wrong. And the people that wrote that and said that should never have any office again in the UN, because that is so absurd. It actually undermines any credibility that senior people might have in terms of drug policy.
The United Nations has declared, as you know, the goal that we will have a drug-free world at some point. So at some point in this, as they achieve this goal, this idea of a drug-free world, most of which, by the way, grows from the ground, they're going to have to start a war on bees, for example, to prevent the pollinization of these plants. But it's particularly absurd because of the very fact that we don't have drug-free prisons, which, by the way, is under direct authority of the very thing enforcing prohibition. So if it's incompetent in prison, if a government cannot enforce its own policies in an environment that it has full control, then I think that should serve as a litmus test to the overall success of the policy in say society.
It's madness, isn't it? It's absolute, utter madness. And yet that is exactly the result that our genius politicians have managed to achieve. You know, they've managed to put the most dangerous substances in the hands of the most irresponsible people.
I don't think it's a good thing that the war on drugs in the West has resulted in deeply nasty, antisocial people having fantastic power and all the money in places like Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Mexico. And variously those governments have been variously successful in the way that they've actually tackled the menace. I do not think it's a good idea for the trade in controlled drugs to be pretty much controlled by bad people, by organised crime. There's fantastic cash, and with cash comes power.
It's horrendous the corrupting influence they have on politicians and on international banks. But having said that, it looked like the banking collapse was averted by drug money. It was only liquid capital in the world in 2007, which is a strange thing. Even the UN Drug Control Agencies admitted to that. But even here in Glasgow, we've seen where our politicians collapse in the city council because of drug influences. What's portrayed in The Wire about politicians being bankrolled by drug money is not unusual. Is all I'm going to say on camera. It's not fabrication. It's so near the mark. It's painful.
The scale of profits generated by criminal drug organizations enables them to undermine governance and state institutions through corruption and intimidation, blur the boundaries between the legal and illegal economies, and threaten the economic stability of entire states and regions. Far from creating a drug-free world, the war on drugs has fueled the development of the world's largest illegal commodities market. The prohibitionist global drug control system has effectively abdicated control of a growing and lucrative trade to violent criminal profiteers, at a cost in enforcement terms estimated to be at least $100 billion a year. The illicit drug market has continually expanded and is now estimated by the UN to turn over more than $330 billion a year, a figure that comes third after the food and oil trades.
Well, the media has a huge influence on the way people perceive drugs, and usually it's a negative influence. So I think there are certainly some newspapers, The Sun, the Daily Mail, that are, actively seek to try to get drugs banned. I think they see that as one of their challenges in life, to get the drugs banned. And they don't care whether the drugs actually are harmful or not, but it's all about creating hysteria around drugs to get them banned. So I think certainly some aspects of the press have a very bad influence.
As an addiction specialist, I think why I would fall on the side of regulation is that it would create a consistent product that people knew then what they were getting. So therefore the informed choices that they were making would be safer choices.
What are the alternatives to the current approach? Well, there are four main options for drug policy reform. 1. Increasing the intensity of the war on drugs. 2. Refinements to a primarily criminal justice-led approach. 3. A reorientation to a health-based approach and decriminalization of drug use. 4. State regulation and control of drug production and supply. So is this a war on drugs or a war on people? You decide.